sound going down, camera audio going up. We welcome you to another Sunday night edition of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Hope everyone is doing well. I'd like to say hello to everybody watching on YouTube. It's nice to see people enjoying the book. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you guys for joining me here live on Twitch. I am Joel K. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every Sunday night live. We read public domain books here. We read it to go against the crazy people who want to burn and ban books that you have the right to make the choice of your own. And tonight we are continuing, as you've been following along, the next 4 chapters of the H.G. Wells classic science fiction adventure, The Island of Doctor Moreau. And because we ran short on time and that one chapter last week was really long, we kind of forego a 4th chapter last week, and we will do a 4th tonight. Keep fingers crossed. Well, let's get started, guys, and we'll get into the next one as we have a slight shift on the camera. The next 4 chapters of The Island of Doctor Moreau. This one, chapter 15, concerning the beast folk. I woke early. Moreau's explanation stood before my mind, clear and definite, from the moment of my awakening. I got out of the hammock and went to the door to assure myself that the key was turned. Then I tried the window bar and found it firmly fixed. That these man-like creatures were in truth only bestial monsters, mere grotesque travesties of men, filled me with vague uncertainty of their possibilities, which was far worse than any definite fear. A tapping came at the door, and I heard the gluttonous accents of Meling speaking. I pocketed one of the revolvers, keeping one hand upon it, and opened it to him. "Good morning, sir," he said, bringing in addition to the customary herb breakfast, an ill-cooked rabbit. Montgomery followed him, his eyes roving, caught the position of my arm, and smiled askew. The puma was resting to heal that day, but Moreau, who was singularly solitary in his habits, did not join us. I talked with Montgomery to clear my ideas of the way in which the beast folk lived. In particular, I was urgent to know how these inhuman monsters were kept from falling upon Moreau and Montgomery and from rendering one another. He explained to me that the comparative nature safety of Moreau and himself was due to the limited mental scope of these monsters. In spite of their increased intelligence and the tendency of their animal instincts to reawaken, they had certain fixed ideas implanted by Moreau in their minds, which absolutely bound their imaginations. They were absolutely hypnotized, had been told that certain things were impossible and that certain things were not to be done, and these prohibitions were woven into the texture of their minds beyond any possibility of disobedience or dispute. Certain matters, however, in which old instinct was at war with Moreau's convenience, were in less stable condition. A series of propositions called the law, I had already heard them recited, battled in their minds with the deep-seated, ever-rebellious cravings of their animal nature. This law they were ever repeating, I found, and ever breaking. Both Montgomery and Moreau displayed particular solicitude to keep them ignorant. Yeah, it's fine. Sorry, guys. My executive producer came in to say something to me. Montgomery told me that the law, especially among the feline beast people, became oddly weakened about nightfall, that then the animal was at its strongest, that a spirit of adventure sprang up at them at dusk. To that I owed my stalking by Leopard Man on the night of my arrival. But during these earlier days of my stay, they broke the law only furtively and after dark, and in the daylight there was a general atmosphere of respect for its multifariation prohibitions. And here perhaps I gave a few general facts about the general and the beast people on the island, which was irregular outlined and lay low upon the wide sea, had a total area, I presume, of 7 or 8 square miles. It was volcanic in origin, and was now fringed on all three sides by coral reefs, some fumaroles to the northward, and a hot spring were the only vestiges of the forces that had long since originated it. Now and then a faint quiver of earthquake could be sensible, and sometimes the ascent of a spire of smoke would be rendered tumultuous by gusts of steam, but that was all. The population of the island, Montgomery informed me, now outnumbered rather more than 60 of these strange creations of Moreau's art, not counting the smaller monstrosities which lived in the undergrowth and were without human form. Although he had made nearly 120, but many had died, and the others, like the writhing foolish thing of which he had told me, had come by violent ends. In answer to my question, Montgomery had said that they actually bore offspring, but that these generally died. When they lived, Moreau took them and stamped the human form out of them. There was no evidence of inheritance of their acquired human characteristics. The females were less numerous than the males, and liable to much furtive persecution in spite of the monogamy the law enjoined. It would be impossible for me to describe these beast people in detail. My eye has had no training in details, and unhappily I cannot sketch. Most striking, perhaps, in their general appearance was their disproportion between legs of the creatures and the length of their bodies, and yet so relative is our idea of grace. My eye became habituated to their forms, and at last I even fell in with their persuasion that my own long thighs were ungainly. Another point was the forward carriage of their head and the clumsy and inhuman curvature of their spine. Even the ape man lacked that inward sinuous curve of the back which makes the human figure so graceful. Most of their shoulders hunched clumsily, and their forearms hung weakly at their sides. Few of them were conspicuously hairy, at least until the end of my time upon the island. The next most obvious deformity was in their faces, almost all which were prognathous, malformed about the ears, with large protuberant noses, very furry or very bristly hair, and often strangely colored or strangely placed eyes. None could laugh, though the ape man had a chattering titter. Beyond these general characters, their heads had little in common. Each preserved the quality of its own particular species. The human mark distorted, but it did not hide the leopard, the ox, or the sow, or the other animal or animals from which the creatures had been molded. The voices, too, varied exceedingly. Their hands were always malformed, and though some surprised me by their unexpected human appearance, almost all were deficient in their number of their digits, clumsy about their fingernails, and lacking any tactile sensibility. The two most formidable animal men were my leopard man and the creature made of hyena and swine. Larger than these were the three bull creatures who pulled in the boat. Then came the silvery, hairy man who was also the sayer of the law, Mailing, and the satyr like creature of ape and goat. There were three swine men and three swine women, a mare rhinoceros creature, and several other females whose sources I could not ascertain. There were several wolf creatures, a bear bull, and a St. Bernard man. I have already described the ape man, and there was a particular hateful, even smelling, old woman made of vixen and bear, whom I hated from the beginning. She was said to be passionate votary of the law. Smaller creatures were certain dappled youths and my little sloth creatures, but enough of this catalogue. At first I had a shivering horror of the brutes, felt all too keenly that they were still brutes, but sensibly I became a little habituated to the idea of them, and moreover I was affected by Montgomery's attitude towards them. I had been with them so long that they had come to regard them as almost normal human beings. His London days seemed a glorious, impossible past to him. Only once in a year or so did he go to Africa to deal with Moreau's agents, a trader in animals there. He hardly met the finest type of mankind in that seafaring village of Spanish mongrels. The men aboard the ship, he told me, seemed at first just as strange to him as the beast men seemed to me. Unnaturally long in the leg, flat in the face, prominent in the forehead, suspicious, dangerous, and cold-hearted. In fact, he did not like men. His heart had warmed to me, he thought, because he had saved my life. I fancied even that he had had a sneaking kindness for some of these metamorphized brutes, a vicious sympathy with some of their ways, but that was attempted to veil it from me at first. Meiling, the black-faced man, Montgomery's attendant, was the first of the beast folk I had encountered, did not live with the others across the island, but in a small kennel at the back of the enclosure. The creature was scarcely so intelligent as the ape man, but far more docile and most human looking of all the beast folk. And Montgomery had trained it to prepare food, and indeed to discharge all the trivial domestic offices that were required. It was a complex trophy of Moreau's horrible skill, a bear, tainted with dog and ox, and one of the most elaborately made of all his creatures. It treated Montgomery with some strange tenderness and devotion. Sometimes he would notice it, pat it, and call it half mocking, half jocular names, and so it became caper with extraordinary delight. Sometimes he would ill treat it, especially after it had been at the whiskey, kicking it, beating it, pelting it with stones or lighted fuses. But whether he treated it well or ill, it loved everything so much as to be near him. As I say, I became habituated to the beast people, that and a thousand things which had seemed unnatural or repulsive speedily became natural and ordinary to me. I supposed everything in existence takes its color from the average hues of our surroundings. Montgomery and Moreau were too particular and individual to keep my general impressions of humanity well defined. I would see one of the clumsy bovine creatures who worked the launch treading heavily through the undergrowth, and find myself asking, trying hard to recall, how he differed from some really human yokel trudging home from his mechanical labors. Or I would meet the fox bear woman's vulpine, shifty face, strangely human in its speculative, cunning, and even imagined I had met it before in some city byway. Yet every now and then the beast would flash out upon me beyond doubt or denial, an ugly looking man, a hunchbacked human savage to all appearance, squatting in the apertures of one of the dens, and would stretch his arms and yawn, showing with startling suddenness scissors edged incisors and saber like canines, keen and brilliant as knives. Or in some narrow pathway, glancing with a transitory staring into the eyes of the lithe, white, swayed female figure, I would suddenly see, with a spasmodic revulsion, that she had a slit like pupils, and glancing down, note that the curving nails from which she held her shapeless wrap about her. It was a curious thing, by the by, for which I am quite unable to account, that these weird creatures, the females, I mean, had in early days of my stay had instinctive sense of their own repulsive clumsiness, and displayed in consequence a more human regard for the decency and decorum of extensive costume. Chapter 16. How the Beast Folk Taste Blood. My inexperience as a writer betrays me, and I wander from the thread of my story. After I had breakfast with Montgomery, he took me across the island to see the fumarole and sources of the hot spring into which hot scalding waters I had blundered on the previous day. Both of us carried whips and loaded revolvers. While going through a leafy jungle on our road hither, we heard a rabbit squealing. We stopped and listened, but we heard no more. And presently we went on our way, and incident dropped out of our minds. Montgomery called my attention to the certain little pink animals with long hind legs that went leaping through the undergrowth. He told me they were creatures made of the offspring of the beast people that Moreau had invented. He had fancied that they might serve for meat, but like rabbit-like habit of devouring their young had defeated this intention. I had once encountered some of these creatures, once during my moonlit flight from the leopard man, and once during my pursuit by Moreau on the previous day. By chance, one hopping to avoid us leapt into the hole caused by the uprooting of a wind-blown tree. Before I could extricate myself, we had managed to catch it. It spat like a cat, scratched and kicked vigorously with its hind legs, and made an attempt to bite, but its teeth were too feeble to inflict any more than a painless pinch. It seemed to me rather a pretty little creature, and as Montgomery stated, it never destroyed the turf by burrowing. It was always very cleanly in its habits. I should imagine it prove a convenient substitute for the common rabbit in gentlemen's parks. We also saw on our way the trunk of the tree bark in long strips and splinters deeply. Montgomery called my attention to this. Not to claw bark or of trees. That is the law, he said. Much of them care for it, as after this, I think that we met the satyr and the ape-man. The satyr was a glim of the classical memory of the part on Moreau, his face ovine in expression, like the coarser Hebrew type. His voice was harsh and bleak. His tusk neither extremities satanic. He was gnawing the tusk of the pod-like fruit as he passed us. Both of them saluted Montgomery. Hail, they said, to the other with the whip. There's a third with the whip now, said Montgomery, so you'd better mind. Was he not made? Said the ape-man. He said he was made. The satyr man looked curiously at me. The third with the whip, he that walks weeping into the sea, has a thin white face. He has a thin long whip, said Montgomery. Yesterday he bled and wept, said the satyr. You never bleed or weep. The master does not bleed or weep. All there that fen beggar, said Montgomery. You'll bleed and weep if you don't look out. He has 5 fingers. He is a 5-man like me, said the 8-man. Come along, Pendrick, said Montgomery, taking my arm, and I went on with him. The satyr and the 8-man stood watching us and making other remarks to each other. He says nothing, said the satyr. Men have voices. Yesterday he asked me of things to eat, said the 8-man. He did not know. Then they spoke inaudibly things, and I heard the satyr laughing. It was on our way back that we came upon the dead rabbit. The red body of the wretched little beast was rented to pieces, many of the ribs stripped white, and the backbone indisputably gnawed. At that Montgomery stopped. Good God, he said, stooping down, picking up some of the crushed vertebrae to examine them more closely. Good God, he repeated. What can this mean? Some carnivore of yours has remembered its old habits, I said with a pause. This backbone has been bitten through. He stood staring, his face white with his lips pulled askew. I don't like this, he said slowly. I saw something of this kind, said I, the first day I came here. The devil you did! What was it? A rabbit, with its head twisted off. The day you came here? The day I came here. It was in the undergrowth at the back of the enclosure. When I went out in the evening, the head was completely wrung off. Montgomery gave a low whistle. And what is more, I have an idea which of your brutes did this thing. It's only suspicion, you know. Before I came on the rabbit, I saw one of your monsters drinking in the stream. Sucking his drink? Yes. Not to suck your drink. That is the law. Much of the brutes care for the law, eh? When Moreau's not about. It was not a brute who chased me. Of course, said Montgomery. It's just the way of the carnivores. After a kill, they drink. It is the taste of blood, you know. What was the brute like? He continued. Would you know him again? He glanced about us, standing astride over the mess of the dead rabbit, his eyes roving among the shadows and screens of greenery and lurking places and abundance of the forest that inbounded us in. The taste of blood, he said again. He took out his revolver, examined the cartridges in it, and replaced it. Then he began to pull at his dropping lip. I think I know the brute again, I said. I stunned him. I ought to have a handsome bruise on my forehead of him. But then we have to prove that he killed the rabbit, Montgomery said. I wish I had never brought the little things here. I should have gone on, but they stayed there, thinking over the mangled rabbit in a puzzled-headed way. As it was, I went to such a distance that the rabbit's remains were hidden. Come on, I said. Presently he woke up and came towards me. You see, he said, almost in a whisper, they are all supposed to have a fixed idea against eating anything that runs on the ground. If some of the brutes has by any accident tasted blood. We went on some way in silence. I wonder what can have happened, he said to himself. Then he paused again. I did a foolish thing the other day. The servant of mine, I showed him how to cook and skin a rabbit. It's odd. I saw him licking his hands. It never occurred to me. Then we must put a stop to this. I must tell Moreau. He could think of nothing else on our homeward journey. Moreau took the matter even more seriously than Montgomery, and I need scarcely say that I was affected by their evident consternation. We must make an example, said Moreau. I have no doubt in my mind that the leopard man was the sinner, but how can we prove it? I wish, Montgomery, you had kept your taste for meat in hand and gone without these exciting novelties. We may have found ourselves in a mess yet through it. I was a silly ass, said Montgomery, but the thing's done now, and you said I must have them, you know. We must see at the things at once, said Monroe. I suppose if anything should turn up, Mei can take care of himself. I'm not sure about Mei, said Montgomery. I think I ought to know him. In the afternoon, Moreau, Montgomery, myself, and Mei went across the island to the huts in the ravine. We three were armed. Mei carried a little hatchet in use in chopping firewoods. In some coils of wire, Moreau had a huge cowherd's horn slung over his shoulder. You will see a gathering of the beast people, said Montgomery. It is a pretty sight. Moreau said not a word on the way, but the expression of his heavy, white-fringed face was grimly set. We crossed the ravine down which smoked through the stream of the hot water and followed the winding path through the cane brakes until we reached the wide area covered over with thick powdery yellow substance which I believe was sulfur. Above the shoulder of a weedy bank the sea glistened. We came to a kind of shallow natural amphitheater, and here the four of us halted. Then Moreau sounded the horn and broke the sleeping stillness of the tropical afternoon. He must have had strong lungs. The hooting noise rose and rose amidst the echoes to at last an ear-penetrating intensity. Ah, said Moreau, letting the curved instrument fall to his side again. Immediately there was a crashing through the yellow canes and a sound of voices from the dense green jungle that marked the morass through which I had run on the previous day. Then, at 3 or 4 points on the edge of the sulphurous area, appeared the grotesque forms of the beast people hurrying towards us. I could not help a creeping horror as I perceived first one, then another trot out from the trees or reeds and come shambling along over the hot dust. But Moreau and Montgomery stood calmly enough, and perforce I stuck behind them. First to arrive was the satyr, strangely unreal for all that he cast a shadow and tossed the dust with his hoofs. After him from the brake came the monstrous lout, a thing of horse and rhinoceros, chewing a straw as it came. Then appeared the swine woman, and 2 wolf women, then the fox bear witch, and her eyes were in peaked red face, and others, all hurrying eagerly. As they came forward, they began to cringe towards Moreau and chant, quite regardless of one another, fragments of the latter half the litany of the law. His is the hand that wounds, his is the hand that heals, and so forth. As soon as they approached within a distance of perhaps 30 yards, they halted, and bowing on knees and elbows, began flinging the white dust upon their heads. Imagine the scene if you can. We 3 blue-clad men, with our misshapen, black-faced attendant, standing in a wide expanse of sunlit yellow dust, under the blazing blue sky, and surrounded by this circle of crouching and gesticulating monstrosities, some almost human, save their subtle expressions and gestures, some like cripples, some so strangely distorted as to resemble nothing but the denizens of our wildest dreams. And beyond, the reedy lines of the cane brakes in one direction, a dense tangle of palm trees on the other, separating us from the ravine on the huts. To the north hazy horizon of the Pacific Ocean. 62, 63, counted Moreau. There are 4 more. I do not see the leopard man, said I. Presently Moreau sounded the great horn again, and at the sound of it all the beast people writhed and groveled in the dust. Then, slinking out of the canebrake, stooping near the ground, and trying to join the dust-thrown circle behind Moreau's back, came the leopard man. The last of the beast people to arrive was the little ape man. The earlier animals, hot and weary with all their groveling, shot vicious glances at him. Cease, said Moreau in a loud, firm voice, and the beast people sat back upon their hams and rested from their worshipping. Where is the sayer of the law? Said Moreau, and the hairy gray monster bowed his face to the dust. Say the words, said Moreau. Forthwith, all in the kneeling assembly, swaying from side to side and dashing up the sulphur with their hands, first the right hand in the puff of dust, and then the left, began to once more chant their strange litany. When they reached, not to eat flesh or fish, that is the law, Moreau held up his lank white hand. Stop, he cried, and there fell absolute silence upon them all. I think they all knew and dreaded what was coming. I looked round at their strange faces. When I saw their wincing attitudes and the furtive dread in their bright eyes, I wondered that I ever believed them to be men. That law has been broken, said Moreau. None escape from the faceless creature with the silvery hair. None escape, repeated the kneeling circle of the beast people. Who is he? Cried Moreau, and looked around at their faces, cracking the whip. I fancied the hyena swine looked dejected, so too did the leopard man. Moreau stopped facing this creature, whose cringed towards him with memory and dread of infinite torment. Who is he? Repeated Moreau in a voice of thunder. Evil is he who breaks the law, chanted the sayer of the law. Moreau looked into the eyes of the leopard man and seemed to be dragging the very soul out of the creature. Who breaks the law? Said Moreau, taking his eyes off his victim and turning towards us. It seemed to me there was a touch of exultation in his voice. Goes back to the house of pain, all clamored. Goes back to the house of pain, O master. Back to the house of pain. Back to the house of pain, gabbled the ape-man as though the idea was sweet to him. Do you hear? Said Moreau, turning back to his criminal. My friend. Hello. For the leopard man, released from Moreau's eyes, had risen straight from his knees, and now, with eyes aflame and his huge feline tusks flashing out from under his curling lips, leapt towards his tormentor. I am convinced that only the madness of the unendurable fear could have prompted this attack. The whole circle of the 80 monsters seemed to rise about us. I drew my revolver. The 2 figures collided. I saw Moreau reeling back from the leopard man's blow. There was furious yelling and howling all about us. Everyone was moving rapidly. For a moment I thought it was a general revolt. The furious face of the leopard man flashed by mine, with Mei-Ling close in pursuit. I saw the yellow eyes of the hyena swine blazing with excitement, as his attitude as if were half resolved to attack me. The satyr, too, glared at me over the hyena swine's hunched shoulders, and I heard the crack of Moreau's pistol, and saw the pink flash dart across the tumult. The whole crowd seemed to swing around in the direction of the glint of fire, and I too was swung around by the magnetism of the moment. In another second, I was running, one of the tumultuous shouting crowd, in pursuit of the escaping leopard man. That is, that is all I can tell definitely. I saw the leopard man strike Moreau, and then everything spun about me until I was running headlong. Mei Ling was ahead, close in pursuit of the fugitive. Behind, their tongues already lolling out, ran the wolf women in great leaping strides. The swine folk followed, squealing with excitement, and the two bullmen were swathing the white. Then came Moreau in a cluster of beast people, his wide-brimmed straw hat blown off, his revolver in hand, and his lank white hair streaming out. The hyena swine ran beside me, keeping pace with me and glancing furtively at me out of his feline eyes, and the other came pattering and shouting behind us. The leopard man went bursting his way through the long canes, which sprang back as he passed and rattled in Mei Ling's face. We others in the rear found a trampled path for us to when we reached the break. The chase lay through the break for perhaps a quarter of a mile, and then plunged into a dense thicket, which stopped our movements exceedingly together, though we went through it in a crowd together. Fronds flicking in our faces, ropey creatures catching us under the chin or gripping our ankles, thorny plants hooking in and tearing cloth and flesh altogether. He has gone on all fours through this, panted Moreau just ahead of me. None escape, said the wolf bear, laughing into my face with the exultation of hunting. We burst out again among the rocks, and saw our quarry ahead running lightly on all fours, and snarling at us over his shoulder. At that the wolf folk howled with delight. The thing was still clothed, and at distance his face still seemed human. But the carriage of his four limbs was feline, and the furtive drop of his shoulders was distinctively that of a hunted animal. It leapt over some thorny yellow flowering bushes and was hidden, Mei Ling halfway across the space. Most of us had now lost the first speed of the chase and had fallen into a longer, steadier stride. I saw as we traversed the open that the pursuit was now spreading from a column into a line. The hyena swine still ran close to me, watching me as it ran, every now and then puckering its muzzle with a snarling laugh. At the edge of the rocks, the leopard man, realizing he was making for the projecting cape, which he had stalked me on the night of my arrival, had doubled in the undergrowth. But Montgomery had seen the maneuver and turned him again. So panting, tumbling against the rocks, torn by bramble, impeded by ferns and reeds, I helped to pursue the leopard man, who had broken the law, and the hyena swine, ran laughing savagely at my side. I staggered on, my head reeling and my heart beating against my ribs, tired almost to death, and yet not daring to lose sight of the chase, lest I should be left alone with this horrible companion. I staggered on in spite of infinite fatigue and dense heat of the tropical afternoon. At last, the fury of the hunt slackened. We had pinned the wretched brute into a corner of the island. Moreau, whip in hand, marshaled us all into irregular line, and advanced now slowly, shouting to one another as we advanced, and tightening the cordon around our victim. He lurked noiselessly and invisible in the bushes, through which I had run from him the midnight pursuit. "Steady!" cried Moreau. "Steady!" as the ends of the line crept around the tangle of the undergrowth and hemmed the brute in. "Where rush came the voice of Montgomery from beyond the thicket. I was on the slope above the bushes. Montgomery and Moreau beat along the beach beneath. Slowly we pushed in among the fretted network of branches and leaves. The quarry was silent. Back to the house of pain, to the house of pain, the house of pain, yelped the voice of the ape man, some 20 yards to the right. When I heard that, I forgave the poor wretch all I fear he had inspired in me. I heard the twigs snap and the boughs swish aside before the heavy tread of the horse rhinoceros upon my right. Then suddenly, through the polygon of green in half darkness, under the luxuriant growth, I saw the creature we were hunting. I halted. He was crouched together into the smallest possible compass, his luminous green eyes turned over his shoulder regarding me. It may seem a strange contradiction in me. I cannot explain the fact. But now, seeing the creature there in perfectly animal attitude, with the light gleaming in its eye and its imperfectly human face distorted with terror, I realized again the fact that its humanity. In another moment, another of its pursuers would see it, and it would be overpowered and captured, to experience once more the horrible tortures of the enclosure. Abruptly, I slipped out my revolver, aimed between the terror-struck eyes, and fired. As I did so, the hyena's swine saw the thing and flung itself upon it with an eager cry, thrusting thirsting teeth into its neck. All about me the green masses of the thicket was swaying and cracking as the beast people came rushing together. One face and then another appeared. "Don't kill it, Pendrick!" cried Moreau. "Don't kill it!" And I saw him stooping as he pushed through the fronds of the big ferns. In another moment he had beaten off the hyena's swine with the handle of the whip, and he and Montgomery were keeping away the excited carnivorous beast people, and particularly Mei Ling, from the still quivering body. The hairy gray thing came sniffing at the corpse under my arm, and the other animals, in their animal ardor, jostled me to get a nearer view. "Confound you, Pendrick," said Moreau. "I wanted him." "I'm sorry," said I, though I was not. It was impulse at the moment. I felt sick with excitation and excitement. Turning, I pushed my way out of the crowding beast people and went up along the slope towards the higher part of the headland. Under the shouted directions of Moreau, I heard the three white sloth bullmen begin dragging the victim towards the water. It was easy now for me to be alone. The beast people manifested a quite human curiosity about the dead body, and followed it into a thick knot, sniffing and growling at it as the bullmen dragged it down to the beach. I went to the headland and watched the bullmen, blacked with the evening sky, as they carried the weighted dead body out to sea. And like a wave across my mind came the realization of the unspeakable aimlessness of things upon this island. Upon the beach, among the rocks beneath me, were the ape man, the hyena swine, and several other of the beast people, standing about Montgomery and Moreau. They were all still intensely excited, and all overflowing with noisy expressions of their loyalty to the law. Yet I felt an absolute assurance in my own mind that the hyena swine was implicated in the rabbit killing. A strange persuasion came upon me that, save for the grossness of the line, the grotesqueness of the forms, I had here before me the whole balance of human life in miniature, and the whole interplay of instinct, reason, and fate in its simplest form. The leopard man had happened to go under. That was all the difference. Poor brute. Poor brutes. I began to see the viler aspect of Moreau's cruelty. I had not thought before of the pain and trouble that had come to these poor victims after they had passed from Moreau's hands. I had shivered only at the days of actual torment in the enclosure, but now that they seemed me the lesser part before they had been beasts, their instincts fitly adapted to their surroundings, and happily as living things may be. Now they stumbled into the shackles of humanity, lived in fear that they never died, fretted by the law they could not understand. Their mock human existence, begun in an agony with one long internal struggle, one long dread of Moreau. And for what? It was wantonness of it that stirred me. Had Moreau had any intelligible object, I could have sympathized at least with a little of him. I am not so squeamish about pain as that. I could have forgiven him a little even, and his motive been only hate, but he was so irresponsible, so utterly careless. His curiosity, his mad, aimless investigations drove him on, and the things were thrown out to live a year or so, to struggle and to blunder and to suffer, and at last to die painfully. Were wretched in themselves. The old animal hate moved them to trouble one another. The law held them back from a brief hot struggle and a decisive end to their natural animosities. In those days, my fear of the beast people went the way of my personal fear of Moreau. I felt indeed, I fell indeed into a morbid state, deep and enduring and alien to fear, which has left permanent scars upon my mind. I must confess that I lost faith in the sanity of the world when I saw its suffering and the painful disorder of this island. A blind fate, a vast pitiless mechanism which to cut and shape the fabric of existence, and I, Moreau, by his passion for research, Montgomery, by his passion for drink, the beast people, with their instincts and mental restrictions, were torn and crushed ruthlessly, inevitably, amid the infinite complexity of its incessant wheels. But this condition did not come all at once. I think, indeed, that anticipated a little in speaking of it now. Chapter 17. A Catastrophe. Scarcely 6 weeks had passed before I had lost every feeling but dislike and abhorrence for this infamous experiment of Moreau's. My one idea was to get away from these horrible caricatures of my Maker's image, back to the sweet, wholesome intercourse of men, my fellow creatures from whom I was thus separated began to assume idyllic virtues and beauty in my memory. My first friendship with Montgomery did not increase. His long separation from humanity, his secret vice of drunkenness, his evident sympathy with the beast people tainted him to me. Several times I let him go alone among them. I avoided intercourse with them in every possible way. I spent an increasing proportion of my time upon the beach, looking for some liberating sail that never appeared, until one day there fell upon us an appalling disaster, which upon altogether different aspects upon my strange surroundings. It was about 7 or 8 weeks after my landing, rather more, I think, through and not troubled to keep account of time, when this catastrophe occurred. It happened in the early morning. I should think about 6. I had risen and breakfasted early, having been aroused by the noise of 3 beastmen carrying wood into the enclosure. After breakfast, I went to the open gateway of the enclosure and stood there smoking a cigarette and enjoying the freshness of the early morning. Moreau presently came around the corner in the enclosure and greeted me. He passed me by, and I heard him behind me unlock and enter the laboratory. So indurated I was at the time to the admonition, bleh, sorry guys, admonition of the place, that I heard without a touch of emotion the Puma victim begin another day of torture. It met with its persecutor with a shriek, almost exactly like that of an angry virago. Then suddenly something happened. I do not know what to this day. I heard a short, sharp cry behind me, a fall, and I turned, saw an awful face rushing towards me. Not human, not animal, but hellish brown, seamed with red branching scars, red drops starting out upon it, and its eyelids eyes ablaze. I threw up my arms to defend myself from the blow that flung me headlong with a broken forearm, with the great monster, swathed in lint and red-stained bandages, fluttering about, leapt over me and passed. I rolled over and down the beach. I tried to sit up and collapsed upon my broken arm. Then Moreau appeared, his massive white face all the more terrible for the blood that trickled from his forehead. He carried a revolver in one hand. He scarcely glanced at me, but rushed off at once in pursuit of the puma. I tried the other arm and sat up. The muffled figure in front ran in great striding leaps along the beach, and Moreau followed her. She turned her head and saw him, then doubled abruptly, made for the brush. She gained upon him at every stride. I saw her plunge into them, and Moreau, running slantingly to intercept her, fired and missed as she disappeared. Then he too vanished into the green confusion. I stared after them, and then pain in my arm flared up, and with a groan I staggered to my feet. Montgomery appeared in the doorway, dressed with a revolver in his hand. "Great God, Pedrick!" he said, not noticing that I was hurt. "That brute's loose. Tore the fetter out of the wall. Have you seen them?" Then sharply seeing I gripped my arm. "What's the matter?" "I was standing in the doorway," said I. He came forward and took my arm. "Blood on the sleeve," he said, and rolled back the flannel. He pocketed his weapon, felt my arm about painfully, and led me inside. "Your arm is broken," he said, and then, "Tell me exactly how it happened. What happened?" I told him what I had seen, told him in broken sentences with gasps of pain between them, and very dexterously and swiftly he bound my arm meanwhile. He slung it from my shoulder and stood back and looked at me. "You'll do," he said. "And now?" He thought, and he went out and locked the gates to the enclosure. He was absent some time. I was chiefly concerned about my arm. The incident seemed merely one more of the horrible things. I sat down on the deck chair, and I must admit swore heartily at the island. At first dulled, feeling the injury in my arm had already given way to burning pain. Then Montgomery reappeared. His face was rather pale, and he showed more than his lower gums than ever. "I can neither see nor hear anything of him," he said. "I've been thinking he may want my help." He stared at me with expressionless eyes. "That was a strong brute," he said. "It simply wrenched the fetter out of the wall. He went to the window, and then to the door, and then turned to me. 'I shall go after him,' he said. There's another revolver I can leave with you. Tell you the truth, I feel anxious somehow." He obtained the weapon, and I put it ready in my hand on the table. Then went out, leaving a restless contagion in the air. I did not sit long after that he left, but took the revolver in hand and went to the doorway. The morning was as still as death. Not a whisper of the wind, but a stirring. The sea was like polished glass. The sky empty, the beach desolate. In my half excited, half feverish state, the stillness of things oppressed me. I tried to whistle, but the tune died away. I swore again. The second time that morning, I went to the corner of the enclosure and stared inland at the great bush that had swallowed up Moreau and Montgomery. Would they return? And how? Then, far away up the beach, a little gray beast man appeared, ran down to the water's edge, and began splashing about. I strolled back to the doorway, then to the corner again, so too pacing to and fro like a sentinel upon duty. Once I was arrested by the distant voice of Montgomery bawling, "Quay! Montgomery! Moreau!" My arm became less painful, but very hot. I got feverish and thirsty. My shadow grew shorter. I watched the distant figure until it went away. Would Moreau and Montgomery never return? Three seabirds began fighting for some stranded treasure. Then, far away behind the enclosure, I heard a pistol shot. A long silence. And then came another. Then a yelling cry nearer, and another dismal gap of silence. My unfortunate imagination set to work to torment me. Then suddenly a shot close by. I went to the corner, startled, and saw Montgomery, his face scarlet, his hair distorted, and the knee of his trousers torn. His face expressed profound consternation. Behind him slouched the beast man, Mei Ling, and around Mei Ling's jaws were some odd dark stains. "Has he come?" said Montgomery. "Moreau?" said I. "No." "My God." The man was panting, almost sobbing. "Go back in," he said, taking my arm. "They're mad. They're all rushing about mad. What can have happened? I don't know. I'll tell you when my breath comes. Where is the brandy?" Montgomery limped before me into the room and sat in the deck chair. Mei Ling flung himself down just outside the doorway and began panting like a dog. I got Montgomery some brandy and water. He sat staring in front of him at nothing, recovering his breath. After some minutes, he began to tell me what happened. He had followed their track for some way. It was plain enough at first on account of the crushed and broken bushes, white rags torn from the puma's bandages, and the occasional smears of blood on the leaves and the shrubs and undergrowth. He lost the track, however, on the stony ground beyond the stream, where I had seen the beast man drinking, and went wandering aimlessly westward, shouting Moreau's name. Then Mei Ling had come to him, carrying a light hatchet. Mei Ling had seen nothing of the puma affair, had been felling wood, and heard him calling. Then they went on shouting together. Two beastmen came crouching and peering at them through the undergrowth, with gestures and a furtive courage that alarmed Montgomery by their strangeness. He hailed them, and they fled guiltily. He stopped shouting after that, and wandered some time farther in, undecided way, determined to visit the huts. He found the ravine deserted. Growing more alarmed every minute, he began to retrace his steps. Then he encountered the two swine men I had seen dancing on the night of my arrival. Bloodstained they were about the mouth, and intensely excited. They came crashing through the ferns, and stopped with fierce faces when they saw him. He cracked his whip in some trepidation, and forthwith they rushed at him. Never before had a beastman dared to do that. One he shot through the head. Mei Ling flung himself down on the other, and the two rolled grappling. Mei Ling got the brute under with his teeth in his throat, and Montgomery shot that too, as it struggled with Mei Ling's grip. He had some difficulty in inducing Mei Ling to come with him, hence they had hurried back with me to me. On the way, Mei Ling had suddenly rushed into the thicket, driven out by an undersized ocelot man, and also blood-stained and lame through the wound in its foot. This brute had run a little way and then turned savagely at bay, and Montgomery, with certain wantonness, he thought, shot him. "What does this all mean?" said I. Montgomery shook his head and turned once more to the brandy. Chapter 19. The Finding of Moreau. When I saw Montgomery swallow a third dose of brandy, I took it upon myself to interfere. He was already more than half fuddled. I told him there was something serious thing must have happened to Moreau by this time, or he would have returned before this, and that it behooves us to ascertain what catastrophe was. Montgomery raised his feeble objections, but at last agreed. We had some food, and then all three of us started. It is possible due to the tension of my mind at the time, but even now that start into the hot stillness of the tropical afternoon, it is singularly vivid expression. Mei Ling went first, his shoulder haunched, his strange black head moving with quick starts as he peered first on this side of the way and then on that. He was unarmed. His axe he dropped when he encountered the swine men. Teeth were his weapons, and it came to fighting. Montgomery followed with stumbling footsteps, his hands in his pockets, his face downcast, as he was in a state of muddled sulliness with me on account of the brandy. My left arm was in a sling. It was lucky it was my left arm, and I carried my revolver in my right. Soon we traced a narrow path through the wild luxurious of the island, going northwestward, and presently Mei Ling stopped and became rigid with watchfulness. Montgomery almost staggered into him, and then stopped too. Then listening intently, we heard coming through the trees the sound of voices and footsteps approaching us. "He is dead," said a deep, vibrating voice. "He is not dead. He is not dead," jabbered another. We saw, said several voices. "Hullo!" suddenly shouted Montgomery. "Hullo there!" "Confound you," said I, and gripped my pistol. There was a silence. Then a crashing among the interlacing vegetation, first here, then there, and then half a dozen faces appeared, strange faces, lit by the strange light. Mei Ling made a growling noise in his throat. I recognized the ape-man. I had indeed already identified his voice, and two of the white-swathed, brown-featured creatures I had seen in Montgomery's boat. With these were the two dappled brutes, that gray, horribly crooked creature who said the law, with gray hair streaming down his cheeks, heavy gray eyebrows, gray locks pouring off from the central parting upon the sloping forehead, a heavy, faceless thing with strange red eyes looking at us curiously from amidst the green. From a space no one spoke. Then Montgomery hiccuped. "Who said he was dead?" The monkey man looked guilty at the hairy gray thing. "He is dead," said his monster. They saw. There was nothing threatening about his detachment at any rate. They seemed awestruck and puzzled. "Where is he?" said Montgomery. "Beyond," said the gray creature, and the gray creature pointed. "Is there a law now?" asked the monkey man. "Is this to be this and that? Is he dead indeed?" Is there a law? Repeated the man in white. Is there a law? Thou other with the whip. He is dead, said the hairy green thing, and they all stood watching us. Pendrick, said Montgomery, turning his dull eyes towards me. He's dead, evidently. I had been standing behind him during this colloquy. I began to see things lay with them. I suddenly stepped in front of Montgomery and lifted up my voice. Children of the law, I said, he is not dead. Mei-Ling turned his sharp eyes on me. His changed his shape. He has changed his body, I went on. For a time you will not see him. He is there. I pointed upward, where he can watch you. You cannot see him, but he can see you. Fear the law. I looked at them squarely. They flinched. He is great. He is good, said the ape-man, peering fearfully upward among the dense trees. And the other thing, I demanded. The thing that bled and ran screaming and sobbing, that is dead too, said the gray thing, still regarding me. That is well, grunted Montgomery. The other with the whip, began the gray thing. Well, said I. Said he was dead. But Montgomery was still sober enough to understand my motive in denying Moreau's death. He is not dead, he said slowly. Not dead at all. No more dead than I am. Some, said I, have broken the law. Some they will die. Some have died. Show us now where his old body lies, the body he cast away because he had no more need of it. It is this way, man who walked in the sea, said the gray thing. And with these 6 creatures guiding us, we went through the tumult of ferns and creepers and the tree stems towards the northwest. Then came a yelling and a crashing among the branches, and a little pink homunculus rushed by us shrieking. Immediately after appeared a monster in headlong pursuit. A blood-battled who was amongst us almost before he could stop his career. The gray thing leaped aside. Mei-Ling with a snarl flew at it and was struck aside. Montgomery fired and missed, bowed his head, threw up his arms, and turned to run. He fired, and the thing still came on, fired again, point blank into its ugly face. I saw its features vanish in a flash. Its face was driven in, yet it passed me, gripping Montgomery and holding him, fell headlong beside him, and pulled him sprawling upon itself in its death agony. I found myself alone with Mei-Ling, the dead brute, and the prostrate man. Montgomery raised himself slowly and stared in a muddled way at the shattered beast-man beside him. It more than half sobered him. He scrambled to his feet. Then I saw the gray thing returning cautiously through the trees. See, said I, pointing at the dead brute, is the law not alive? This came breaking the law. He peered at the body. He sends the fire that kills, said he in a deep voice, repeating part of the ritual. The others gathered around and stared for space. At last we drew near the westward extremity of the island. We came upon the gnawed and mutilated body of the puma, its shoulder bones smashed by a bullet. Perhaps 20 yards further found at last what we sought. Moreau lay face downward in a trampled space within the cane. One hand was almost severed at the wrist, and his silver hair was dappled in blood. His head had been battered in by the fetas of the puma. The broken canes beneath him were smeared with blood. His revolver we could not find. Montgomery turned him over, resting at intervals with help from the seven beast people, for he was a heavy man. We carried Moreau back to the enclosure. The night was a darkling. Twice we heard unseen creatures howling and shrieking past our little band, and once the little pink sloth creature appeared and stared at us and vanished again. But we were not attacked again. At the gates of the enclosure, our company of beast people left us, Mei Ling going with the rest. We locked ourselves in and then took Moreau's mangled body into the yard and laid it upon a pile of brushwood. Then we went into the laboratory and put an end to all we found living there. And that was the 4 chapters for the night. Next week, we continue, and I believe conclude, the Island of Doctor Moreau. I'm going to double check something here, you guys. Yep, next week. Next Sunday, we conclude, I did have to double check, we conclude the adventure of the Island of Dr. Moreau. This has been, for me, as someone who has grown up enjoying H.G. Wells' work, both in book and in film version, one of the most intense books I have read, and one of the most thoroughly enjoyable books. And I hope you guys have been enjoying it too. I really do. Next week, the last 4 chapters of The Island of Dr. Moreau. As I do every week, we do a little final quote. But I do want to remind you, because we are doing this not only here on Twitch live, and I appreciate everybody who's been watching here on Twitch, we are now putting this on YouTube. And for that, I do ask, when you get a moment, like and subscribe. I want something a little bit fun. This is the email. Give me a yell. Let me know how you guys are doing. Any suggestions? If you guys know specific public domain books that you'd like me to try to find and read, we will be doing that. As I promised last week, and I mentioned that we had something special for the Sunday before Halloween. We will be doing something really amazing, something special for the first time. On this show, live, we will be doing a classic silent horror movie. Now, you and I both know that because of the show, we only do public domain movies and, well, books. But for the first time, I have found a free copy of the movie Nosferatu, which is a German silent film. It's not going to look the greatest, guys, but we will be playing it live, and there is some old orchestral music that goes along with it as part of the movie. So, on the Sunday before Thanksgiving, sorry, that's where my brains are today, guys. So, on the 27th, we will be doing the classic silent horror movie, Nosferatu, here on the channel. Now, as I said before, one of the things that I do here on the channel is something I do similarly to what I do on the Thursday night show. And you guys who have been watching it on YouTube have seen me sporadically putting up um, the Conversation Station, my other show that I do on Twitch TV. I wanted to share that with you as well and putting it alongside the book club reading room. And I hope you guys are enjoying everything. I really do. This for me is a lot of fun. And I hope you guys are enjoying the stories. We will finish up Island of Doctor Moreau next week. The week after is a Sunday. And next week I will tell you on that following Sunday what we're going to be doing. It'll be a little short snippet of public domain and something you guys might enjoy. But as I said, one of the things we do here is we do, as we do on a Thursday night show, we do a quote for the evening, a final quote, a final thought. And I found this mentioned to those watching on the Thursday night show. I found this and I thought of everyone out there. And when you find yourself lost in the darkness of despair, let hope be the light that guides you home. And when you find yourself lost in the darkness of despair, let hope be the light that guides you home. And I hope it does. We all have crazy ass days that hit us every so often. This is craziness out here. We're just over a month away till our patriotic duty of voting. And you know that there's a lot of crazy people out there forcing their ideas that you should not be allowed to cast your vote, not be allowed to read the books that you want, not read the books that you want. This is what we do here. We read public domain books. We read books that other people will objectively say, no, you shouldn't read. And no, we will not let you read. And this is where I'm here saying, yeah, I don't think so. We do what we want. We create our own dreams here. And we have a lot of fun along the way. We stumble on words. We stumbled on a couple good words today during the show. But we have a lot of fun. And I'm glad you guys are here with me. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every Sunday night live on Twitch TV and then uploaded to YouTube. Thank you, YouTube, for allowing me to do that. And thank you for watching. Be well, be safe, be kind. Have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful week. Whenever you guys are watching this throughout the upcoming week, I thank you. I am Joel K. This is the email. Stop by and say hello. Send me an email. Let me know where you guys are watching from. We're still getting used to doing this. We fumble on some of the equipment once in a while, but we kind of straighten out the collar once in a while. Take care, you guys. Have a wonderful night, wonderful day, and we will see you next time.